With the brand new Ork Codex slated to drop in spring this year, Games Workshop have been teasing us with a few new detachment rules for everybody's favourite big green boys. And no, I'm not talking about the salamanders. Recently, they've announced 2 new detachments for the Orks in 10th edition, which is Green Tide and Dread Mob, both offering key specializations based on the units you field in your army. Now, I'm no expert on anything by any means. I'm a guy on the internet, so it's safe to assume that about anything that I say, but I've been taking a look through these new rules and I've had some thoughts. Again, I'm a guy on the internet, so it's safe to assume that I have a lot of opinions about a lot of things. Are any of them right? Well, that's a judgment that I'll best leave to you. The first of these new detachments is Green Tide, which seems to focus on heavily infantry-led armies. When taking this detachment rule, each time an attack targets a boys unit from your army, models in that unit have a +5 invulnerable save against that attack. In addition, each time an attack targets an Ork unit from your army, if it contains 10 or more models, you can re-roll a saving throw of 1 made against that attack. Now, I like the ideas put forth with mob mentality. The idea of overwhelming an Astartes battle tank with just a fuck ton of angry green lads pleases something primal in my soul. However, it does silo your army choices somewhat, perhaps more so than it should. Let's take a look at the second benefit of the detachment. If a unit contains 10 or more models, they can re-roll saving throws of 1. This adds a defensive element to these infantry units, which is helpful since pretty much every model that can take advantage of this feature only has 1 wound to lose. However, there's also very few units that can take advantage of this feature, and even less so that can take advantage of it for long. Essentially, Boys, Beast Snagger Boys, and Gretchen are the primary models that can take the most advantage from this feature, seeing as they can have up to 20 models in their composition. This means they'd need to lose around 11 models, 13 in the case of the Gretchen, before they lose this defensive feature. After that, they're just standard infantry and get no further rerolls to saving throws. Other infantry units like Knobs or Storm Boys can use this feature since they have unit compositions of up to 10, but as soon as they lose even 1 model, they can no longer reroll their saves. It's a nice feature while it lasts, I guess. The most powerful feature of the detachment is granting Boys units a 5-up invulnerable save, a bonus identical to that of calling the Wah. However, this bonus only applies to Boys units. Beast Snagger Boys or Storm Boys lack the Boys keyword specifically, meaning they don't have access to this feature. Of course, these units have their own perks, such as increased potency against monsters and vehicles, or their ability to fucking fly. It feels as though in order to get the most of this detachment rule, the best play would be to field 100 boys on the battlefield at once, all in 20 model units. Now, I would be all for this strategy, mind you, if it wasn't for the fact that there are only 10 monopose boys in the modern kits. You're telling me that I would have to paint 10 sets of 10 duplicate Ork boys just to get the most out of my mad lads? I mean, come on, man, at least let me have some variety. Not like that, though. While your unit variety may be lacking if you want to get the most out of this detachment, the rules teased by Games Workshop also had a few new toys to keep some variety in the game. One of these is the Green Tide specific enhancement, Ferocious Show-Off. This enhancement can be applied to an Ork's infantry model. Each time the bearer fights, while resolving its attacks, it can add 1 to the strength characteristics of the bearer's melee weapons, and if the bearer's unit contains 10 or more models, while resolving these attacks, they can add 3 to the strength characteristic instead. Ferocious Show-Off is a new enhancement which again helps to bolster larger units of boys or other infantry, granting them additional strength based on their size. Again, it seems as though the best way to make use of this enhancement, as well as the overall detachment rules, would be to field mostly boys with little unit variety. The Green Tide also has a few detachment-specific stratagems, focusing again on their infantry units. Bulldozer Brutality is a stratagem that can be applied during the fight phase to 1 boys unit from your army that has not been selected to fight this phase and is within engagement range of 1 or more enemy units. Until the end of the phase, each time your unit is selected to fight, when determining which models in your unit are eligible to fight, any models in your unit that are within 3 inches of 1 or more enemy models are eligible to fight. When resolving those attacks, such models can target 1 of those enemy units that is within 3 inches of them and within engagement range of their unit. That's a lot of words that are hard to read all at once, but Bulldozer Brutality allows you to make the most of your heaving hordes, allowing swarms of boys to make melee attacks even when they're not in traditional engagement range. When piling units into melee, larger groups of models can find it difficult to utilize their numbers when making melee attacks. In the example shown, the 5 blue Tyranids can make melee attacks because they're within melee range, whilst the 3 red Tyranids can make melee attacks because they're within base-to-base contact with the Tyranids in that same unit who are also within melee range. The 2 shaded Tyranids in the back cannot make melee attacks. Now keep in mind, there are 10 models in this unit. Think about how many models wouldn't be in melee range if there were 20 of them. Melee combat like this isn't going to be as much of a problem when fighting larger models like tanks or heavy artillery, but larger squads of boys might find it difficult to pile in and make melee attacks on smaller heroic models, like a Guilliman or Ghazghkull. But for the cost of 1 command point, models that are a little more distant from their foes can still pile in and make melee attacks. Would that be as useful as an Overwatch or insane bravery at a key moment? Perhaps not. But when you're working with mass melee-oriented infantry, you're probably not going to be using those stratagems as much regardless. Alongside Bulldozer Brutality, the Green Tide also gets Come On Lads. Come On Lads! I believe that's the correct pronunciation, I apologize. During your command phase, you can select 1 boys unit from your army, and for the cost of 1 command point, you can return up to D3+2 destroyed models to your unit, excluding characters. Come On Lads is crazy when you consider the durability that it gives you, and I suppose it alone could make up for some of the reduced damage potential when lacking larger vehicles or heavy hitters in your army. I mean, hey, 1 damage is 1 damage, but 1 damage dealt 3 times by 5 freshly resurrected orcs definitely adds up. This also straight up gives them more regenerative power than the fucking Necrons, and honestly, I love them for that. Now, I've got a couple of thoughts on the Green Tide, but before I get too deep into those, I might as well spend some time going over the second detachment rule that Games Workshop has given to us, which is Dread Mob. I agree, they have been uncharacteristically generous. Dread Mob's primary detachment rule is Try Dat Button. Try Dat Button! Is that it? Did I read that right? Each time a mech, Orc's Walker, or Grot's vehicle unit from your army is selected to shoot or fight, roll 1d6. Until the end of the phase, weapons equipped by models in that unit have the corresponding ability shown in the table below. On the rolling of a 1 or a 2, the models receive sustained hits 1. On a roll of 3 or 4, these models get lethal hits. On a 5 or a 6, you get a semi-unique feature, where each time an attack is made with the weapon, on a critical wound you can improve the armor penetration characteristic of that attack by 2. Alternatively, if you don't want to roll or just hate fun, when such a unit is selected to shoot or fight, you can select one of the abilities above instead of rolling a d6. If you do, until the end of that phase, weapons equipped by models in that unit have the Hazardous ability as well. If a weapon equipped by a model from your army has the Hazardous ability already, each time you take a Hazardous test for that weapon, it is failed on a roll of 1 or 2. Now, Try Dat Button is a detachment rule that I love. Its simple focus on mechs gives you some hefty bolstering for the larger centerpieces of your army, while the random d6 bonus table grants you some chaotic variety that I think is just perfect for the orcs. What I love most about this detachment rule is that its main features can apply to a bunch of different units, most of which are more likely to be the key centerpieces for your army. For example, sure, a regular Def Dread can gain the benefits listed prior, but so can a giant Morkanaut, or even the Titanic Stomper. This means you can play with a bunch of different models and have the freedom to switch them in or out of your army. You're not being relegated to a single mech or walker variant in order to get the most out of your warband. On top of that, the idea of giving your own weapons the Hazardous ability in exchange for a strategic button choice is very on brand for the orcs. If I ever end up blowing myself sky high and losing a battle, I definitely want that to be my own fault because of my bad choices. In the preview of this detachment, we've only seen one extra stratagem that's unique to the Dread Mob, and while it's unclear if this will be the only Dread Mob specific stratagem, I think we can assume that there'll be some extras in the final codex. The stratagem in question is bigger shells for bigger gits, which can be applied to one of your mechs, orc walkers, or grots vehicles during its shooting phase. Each time you use this stratagem, you can choose to push it. Until the end of the phase, each time a model in your unit makes an attack against a monster or vehicle, you can add 1 to the wound roll. If you choose to push it, you can also add 1 to the damage characteristic of that attack. Until the end of the phase, however, ranged weapons equipped by models in this unit have the hazardous ability as well. I think this stratagem is interesting. Increasing your chance to wound against monsters or vehicles is a neat feature, but not necessarily one that I'd be willing to pay 1 CP for at the best of times. In addition, adding 1 to the damage characteristic of ranged attacks and becoming hazardous in return is also an interesting choice. I'm always a gambler when it comes to dice games, which I see the irony in, so I wouldn't mind chancing for a bit more explosive firepower, if I had enough mechs and enough enemies to spend it on. I think it's an interesting choice to have the extra potency be optional. Personally, I feel as though I wouldn't be getting my money's worth, or my CP's worth, I guess, if I was to just use the basic version of the stratagem. To me, it would feel like I'm paying full price for half a sandwich, whereas I could get the full sandwich if I wanted to, even if it does have a 20% chance of blowing up in my face. Which I guess in this metaphor is, accidentally having pickles, I guess? All in all, I think these are some exciting new additions to the Ork rules that I can't wait to play with. I think it's interesting that the viability of these detachments, however, really depend on the composition of your army, and what models specifically you have to muster. Green Tide and Dread Mob detachment features are pretty hard locked to the kind of units you have to field. When fielding either detachment, there will straight up be no benefits to entire swaths of units you have at your disposal, which is fine, to a point, I guess. I can't help but compare these to the detachment rules of the Space Marines or the Tyranids in 10th edition. The Space Marine detachment rules seem almost unit agnostic, and are more tailored to what enemies you intend to fight or how you want your playstyle to be, rather than what models you have to field. Detachment rules that give your Space Marines keywords like Assault or Heavy across the board can be applied to your units regardless of what you want to run, and that comes with a lot of flexibility. Even the Tyranids, who have detachment rules that focus on key units like Harvesters or larger monsters, still have open detachments like Hyper-Adaptations or Synaptic Imperatives that can be applied across the board regardless of what units you have to muster. If you had a specific set of Tyranids, you might be locked out of 1 or 2 detachments. If you have a specific set of Orks right now, it feels more like you're locked to a singular detachment, with the rest of them being completely unusable to you. Even the default detachment Tribe, which is slated to be renamed to Warhorde, which is far easier to pronounce quietly, highlights melee units rather than ranged ones, again putting you in a space where if you aren't building a melee-oriented force, you're missing out on key optimizations that other units might be able to field. With these detachments, we also got a small hint of 2 more detachments that are going to be included in the full codex. The Cult of Speed, which seems to focus on vehicles, and the Bully Boys, which seems to focus on knobs rather than boys. Now, I know this only means we have details of 2 of the probable 6 detachments, but if the next 2 are also focusing on key units, then I'm worried that Ork players will become locked to their most optimal detachment rules, rather than having the flexibility that other armies like the Space Marines have. Personally, when it comes to tabletop games like Warhammer, I love having the ability to customize how I want my buff fictional men to play. Anybody who's played Dungeons & Dragons with me knows that I will multi-class fighter and wizard to create a weird psychic sociopath who may not be viable in every scenario, but are a ton of fun to play when they are. My worry with what we're seeing with the Orks so far is that we might not get this level of customization. It's not that I want my army to be tournament viable or in the meta, quote unquote. I just want to have choices as to how I play. Based on how I'm looking to build my Ork army and what units I'm interested in building and painting, I simply wouldn't be able to use the Dread Mob detachment, as I don't have any mechs or walkers that I want to muster. Choosing that detachment, to me, wouldn't be a bad choice that's still kinda fun to play. It would be a bad choice because it provides me with zero benefits. If you don't have the right units, then you get nothing from the detachment rule. And I don't want to be put into a position where I'm forced to choose a detachment based on the units I have, or spend $250 buying brand new units to field just so I can get some variety. Oh, wait, that actually might be what Games Workshop's strategy is here. That sounds like it might make sense. Again, I could be wrong about this. In fact, I hope I'm wrong about this. Although that being said, the idea of walking into a Warhammer store and fronting up with 100 individual Ork boys with varying amounts of kit bashing to differentiate themselves does seem like a fun idea of a Thursday night to me. So maybe it's not so bad after all. But anyway, what do you think about these new detachments? Do you think they'll give you a fun new way to play your angry green fungus boys? Are you lamenting the mechanics of a previous edition that nobody but you remembers? Let me know in the comments below. And if you disagree with anything that I've said here, let me say this. Whatever you're thinking, you're correct. I concede. You win. You won. You're free. Yeah.